Thank you. I have asked to point out your intention to a development that, according to my opinion, is risking our security. I'm referring to the bad agreement with Iran. Why bad? Because A, it gives massive funds to terrorism and to Iranian aggressions in the entire region, hundreds of billions of dollars. And by the end of the deal, 2031, $1 trillion, unimaginable sums. Second, it gives Iran super centrifuges. I would like to explain what it is. Centrifuges with the abilities and capabilities of 10 times or 20 times more than the older version of centrifuges. Currently, they have 5,000 from the older generation, and now, within 2 years, they can produce double the amount of 10 or 20 times more than what they have. It increases their ability to produce uranium and mass scope of nuclear power. The third thing is nuclear immunity. Iran is essentially immune to any sanctions. The P5+1 committing, you can be a threshold nuclear state and you are immune from an attack. What the agreement does not include is, first and foremost, no demand to stop terrorism, not addressing the issue of ballistic missiles, no addressing that whatsoever, not addressing the issue of stopping development of nuclear weapons. Only two phrases, this general statement, nothing. They're not getting into the guts of producing nuclear weapons. This is what actually triggers nuclear power. Not to ballistic missiles, not to nuclear weapons, and of course no sufficient international monitoring, not effective. Iran. This is a bad deal, and I would like to stress it makes Iran get anything, everything, and not give anything. Nuclear weapons make no distinction between right and left, Jews, Arabs, Orthodox, secular. There's a real serious threat. We must address it. So what needs to be done? First, we need to acknowledge the fact that the current agreement is far worse than the previous nuclear deal. And when I'm telling that, I'm saying that not because the previous agreement was good. It was not good. We need to understand why it wasn't good. It wasn't good because even Obama admitted
deal will give Iran zero breakout time in 13 years.
Obama in 2015 said that in 2028, the agreement he himself signed will essentially facilitate Iran to reach a near-zero breakaway time to reach nuclear weapons. This deal was so bad that I was needed as a prime minister, alongside my friends, to make some steps that when you're facing an existential catastrophe, you need some extreme measures. For example, going to the American Congress. I cannot not act in the public sphere. The only arena that has some clout over policy. I went to Congress. I went to the UN. I acted in every possible way. Numerous other steps. Some of them you know. Some like the revelation of the nuclear archives. What showed the world, exposed the world that Iran, decades ago, already planned to produce atomic bombs from the type that destroyed Hiroshima. All of this in a bid to counter the public support and of course, to conduct operational activities. As the former Chief of Staff Eisenkot said, without Israeli actions, Iran would have been on a nuclear threshold a long while ago. But alongside that is the diplomatic action, and the diplomatic action created the crucial decision of President Trump. The U.S. withdraws from the nuclear agreement with Iran. Now, tell me. But it did not stop the nuclear plan. So first, it halted it. The crippling sanctions and direct military threat, credible one, is the only thing that stops that, and nothing else stops that. Maybe the credible military threat will not, but deals will not stop the nuclear ambitions. It did not stop Syria, it did not stop Iraq in the time of Saddam Hussein, and it did not stop Gaddafi. The only thing that stopped them is the threat of a military action or a military action. Where we haven't seen a military threat in North Korea, there you had a deal. North Korea signed the NPT deal that was worth nothing. There, we had no military threat. And when there is no military threat, those autocratic states are developing nuclear weapons. And North Korea, this failed state, and this is an understatement, is threatening half of Asia, threatening Japan, the west coast of the U.S., meaning there is no substitute. They're telling you, staying in the agreement, getting out of the agreement with or without an agreement, it doesn't matter. What counts is the existence of a credible military threat alongside crippling sanctions. And if the threat is not working, then you need to be ready to act militarily, as we've seen being done in several cases. This is the most fundamental thing. And I want to tell you, this action is not just a military action, it's also a diplomatic action that enriches this counter-pressure. This highway, this golden highway paving Iran's way for a nuclear arsenal. Now, that was our policy. Now, what did Bennett, Lapid, and Gantz do? They did the exact opposite. First thing they did, or even beforehand, Lapid attacked me back in 2015, criticizing me that I led the counter-pressure that led to this military threat and crippling sanctions. He attacked that. He said that I'm destroying the relations with the U.S. That he knows the U.S., that I don't. He said what he said. Unfortunately, this thing came into expression later on. The second this current government was formed, in a decision that is so outrageous that I can't even describe it. But Bennett promised Biden, I will not conduct a public campaign against going back to a nuclear deal with Iran. Now, I want you to know, the Obama administration and President Biden himself asked me repeatedly, let's talk about the disagreements between us behind closed doors. We will send our officials, we will send your ministers, we will talk behind closed doors. Why did they say that? Because they know that the public campaign over public opinion in Congress, in the Senate, is the only way to influence the policy of the U.S. And they couldn't care less about the officials or the experts you're sending. They don't really give you anything. If they're determined to do this agreement, you can speak to them behind closed doors as much as you want. So they saw that the public campaign that I led in the public sphere, they realized they need to stop the agreement. Obama asked me, let's do it quietly between us, and Biden, in our first or second conversation, asked me that too, and I told them both politely, my government, our government will act differently. And this is how we acted. And so I must say that what surprised me is that not just they gave this amazing promise not to operate in the public opinion sphere in America, that this issue will stay between administration and between officials. The U.S. does not work like that. If you can't influence the public opinion in the U.S., you can't influence the U.S. You just can't. Especially if the president in the White House wants to go differently. What will make them to work your way? Only that way, influencing public opinion. In every democracy, here too, this is the only way that operates. I do not deny that. But they went even further. Gantz even said Israel could leave with a new nuclear deal. Meaning, we can accept a new nuclear deal, meaning their lack of action and their willingness to adopt it and bow their heads head of the in face of the American demands brought about this new agreement. Not just they gave up the diplomatic freedom of action. They gave up the operational freedom of action because Israel committed to a no surprises policy vis-a-vis the U.S., meaning that it committed to report to the U.S. before every operation, any operation against a nuclear deal. They asked me that too, and I never agreed to that. Never. Sometimes I reported, sometimes I did not, but I've made clear I am not committed to reporting to you because I have a greater commitment to the security of my people, of my country, to my army, and I will do whatever it needs to protect us from the nuclear, from the Iranian threat. And this is why this issue is extremely problematic. Why? Once you agree not to surprise the U.S., you are in fact giving up your freedom of action. Because if the U.S., if you're reporting, I can tell you what they did when we did not report. But when we did report, all of a sudden you read about it, Washington Post, the New York Times, the Iranians hear about it, then there goes your operation. Or the alternative, they can simply say, no, don't do that, don't do it. And this is before you had an agreement. And so what will happen after you have an agreement and you will come tell them, well, I want to do this or that operation? They will say, you will ruin the agreement. We have an agreement. We're committed to the agreement. And this is why this thing, this deal essentially gives Iran immunity, and you're destroying this immunity. So this is why Iran is a route to nuclear power and Israel is a bystander. What is our policy? A powerful, worldwide, global campaign against the nuclear deal in capitals, in the UN, in the media, in Congress, in the Senate, every possible forum that has a say to vehemently speak against the nuclear deal, to provide the infrastructure, the background to another administration to get out of the agreement, as we've seen, and two, to legitimize to a possible action on our behalf if and when we act against the nuclear capability. Second, not be a country overshadowed by the U.S., but a sovereign state. We don't need any agreement, any approval for any operation on our end. Not a state sponsored by the U.S. Today, I interviewed on Fox. I did it for years. Spoke in numerous platforms, media outlets, Americans and elsewhere, in favor of our right to act against the nuclear deal in every way. And today, not just among the Western audience, but also Arab audience in Al Arabiya about an hour ago. And they need to understand the Abraham Accord that we've created I would say would not have materialized unless that issue. The Arab countries saw that we have an unwavering determination to act against the nuclear Iranian threat. So peace and security are all based on adopting a complete opposite policy of the current government. So here I want to commit clearly as Prime Minister, with an agreement or without it, with or without an American approval, I will do everything, but everything, to prevent Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons. And one last word. But another issue, you probably remember the Iranian intervention in the recent elections. It was not reported by me, but officially by Facebook. Facebook demolished a network that got involved in the elections and attacked Netanyahu. Now we're seeing another intervention from another direction, from the Palestinian side this time around. There's a secret meeting between Oda and TV in Ramallah. They met with the head of intelligence of the Palestinian Authority, urging them to do everything so I will not get 61 seats. So now it's obvious to you that they're not worried about the interests of the citizens of Israel, not even the Arab citizens of Israel. They did nothing for them. We did for them plans that deserved, that the Arab public deserved. And many of the Arab Israeli citizens know that. But here they met with a hostile element that is trying to meddle in the elections, and we think it's extremely severe, and we have filed an official complaint today in a request to investigate this issue. I was worried when Gantz said that, well, I have no problem with the representatives of the Joint Arab List in Parliament. Yes, of course, because without them you can't form a government. They have only 50 seats in Parliament. Gantz, Lapid, with Meretz and the Joint Arab List, and the Labour and Lieberman. In a good day, they reach 50 seats. Without the Joint List and the Ram Party, they have no government. All those challenges are major, but I would like to conclude with a positive note of hope for the citizens of Israel. We can overcome all of these challenges.
Israel's opposition leader Benjamin Netanyahu holding a press conference in Tel Aviv right now, speaking about what he calls a bad nuclear deal with Iran. A lot to unpack. He was addressing a television audience in Hebrew. With me to unpack what we just heard is our senior international affairs correspondent, Owen Alterman. Break down what stood out. We know he thinks the deal is a bad deal. Talk to us about the message he was giving in Hebrew right now.
Listen, I think it was a great performance. I have to say, obviously some viewers will agree, some will disagree with the content. I think as a communications performance, let's say, I thought it was fantastic. Part fireside chat, part greatest hits, right? All the pictures of those greatest hits moments.
Presentations are back.
Oh, of course, right. Of the Netanyahu theatrics over the Iran issue. And I don't say that, I don't want to say that in a condescending way. Obviously, those theatrics had an important role to play, as Netanyahu himself said. And of course, what can you do? We are just about 2 months away from elections. Part of it, political messaging on this Iran issue. But Benita, I didn't think it was done in a cheap way. I thought it was done in a substantive way, right? Setting up a substantive contrast between his own approach to this issue and, as he described, the other side's approach to this issue of the Bennett and Lapid governments, and setting up that contrast in terms of substance. In terms of the explanation, the fireside chat part, if you will, about why the deal is a bad deal, again, I thought very effective from a communications perspective. Those slides with the very, very big text, really focusing your eye on a few key points. Netanyahu boiling down the argument to a few central points, I thought very effective. Again, going back and explaining his own history, his own long history with this issue. This is an issue that I think sincerely drives him in a way that other issues may not, and that he sincerely believes in what he says about this deal and in how he has handled it and how he has managed it. Again, one can disagree with the tactics and the strategy in terms of going to into the U.S. Congress. But a little bit curious to put the Wile E. Coyote bomb up there as one of the pictures. Again, not seen as one of Netanyahu's strongest moments in this issue. And then the political messaging as well. Again, I thought not cheap, but setting up a substantive contrast between his own position, his own approach, and the approach of Bennett and Lapid. They certainly will have their own arguments, but why they don't want to create conflict with the Biden administration. Netanyahu very eloquently, I think, outlined his arguments about why that conflict is worth it and is essential for Israel and Israel's approach to this issue. And again, laying out exactly what he will do, again, with very large text and boiling it down to a few key points, what he will do with this issue going forward. Not sure this press conference was the place for that other issue at the end about the role of these Arab members of parliament. It, to me, seems like a separate issue, and Netanyahu simply having a hitchhike on the rest of the presentation, I thought less effective. But the presentation on Iran, I thought extremely cohesive. Netanyahu, again, reminding viewers of his great strengths, and Benita, across the political spectrum here in Israel, Netanyahu's ability to advocate for Israel, to be a spokesperson for Israel and the Israeli point of view in foreign media is seen, I think, across the board as one of his strongest attributes. This was a way for him to remind voters of that, again, just about 2 months until Election Day.
And show images of other interviews he's done on this day with American networks, with Arabic